please join me in welcoming President Michael Young. Sir, thank you again. Great to see you. Please have a seat. Good to see you.
Thank you.
And it's overdue, and nice to meet you, finally. I want to talk about higher ed in the broad sense, and I want to talk about the things about your extraordinary campus that are specific to the A&M universe. But I want to ask first about a couple of things that are in circulation in the air right now. See if you can guess what my first question is going to be about. You have a visitor to campus next week, a gentleman named Richard Spencer, who's a white supremacist who has been in the news of late for some extraordinary things he said, and he is being brought to campus, not by the university, but by a person who was enrolled formerly as a student, not a graduate, but somebody who had been an enrolled student. It is the policy of the university, it must be the case, but I want to clarify this, that somebody who has been a student previously has the ability to rent campus space and bring such a person to campus?
It's actually broader than that. I mean,
Explain.
We've had a close relationship with Bryan College Station
Right.
Ever since the university started. And small communities, so the availability of facilities for all sorts of things are limited. And we have had a policy for many years that anybody can actually rent space at the
You don't have to be associated with the university.
You don't have to be a dropout, as this fellow
Individual was.
is.
And you don't have to, and you don't, as a university, in the course of renting the space, get to vet the person who they're bringing to campus?
We have not historically ever done that.
So we come up with a way to bring back people from the dead. Somebody wants to bring Hitler to campus. Policy university is, that's fine?
The policy of the university is consistent with the First Amendment.
Right. And you've been explicit about that. You gave a very strong statement the other day in which you talked about the importance of the First Amendment as the driver here. And even if the university and people associated with the university find this person and his comments to be repellent, First Amendment is what drives your decision to permit this event to go on.
It's also core to what a university does.
Right.
I mean, we have to be comfortable at universities, excuse me, with uncomfortable conversations. We
Right.
have to be prepared to listen to things, even odious things. And there are limits on the First Amendment. And
Right.
we certainly respect those. Anything that incites to violence, that is personal harassment, I
Right.
mean, there are limits on it, and we certainly respect those
Right.
very powerfully.
Well, I wondered about that. You're a Harvard Law graduate. You're much smarter than me, that tells me. You understand the law. Isn't there some sort of a don't shout fire in a crowded movie theater deal going on potentially here, where if this individual comes to campus, the campus is at risk of, in supporting strongly the First Amendment, nonetheless inviting a situation in which there could be some violence. There could be a counter-protest that then becomes a situation on that campus.
First Amendment jurisprudence is really clear on that. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
First Amendment jurisprudence is really clear on that issue as well.
Please, take your time.
Haven't had breakfast yet.
That's all right. Well, we do tend to start our civic engagement early here in Austin. I'm sorry.
Anyway, First Amendment jurisprudence is very clear on that point as well, which is if the person incites the violence, that can be stopped
Right.
immediately or prevented. If,
Right.
on the other hand, it is simply the speech that itself angers people, that isn't the same thing.
Right.
And that is protected speech.
So you have a counter-programming event on that. You announced the other day, Aggies United. You're going to do an event essentially to show that the university stands for values different from the values of this individual.
Well, and I also think it reflects the fact that rational human beings don't think that this speech really deserves the dignity of a response.
Right.
We're doing something else, and if people want to go, certainly would not
Right.
prevent that or in any way stop that. But those of us who have heard what he says, we just don't think that, we're not going to dignify that with taking it seriously. It's not serious.
Last question on this. My colleague, Matthew Watkins, who reports on higher education for the Tribune and is himself an alumnus of Texas A&M, had a story today about the individual who invited this individual to campus. This person, this gentleman who invited this person to campus has invited other controversial people to campus going back to 2000. I think this is the 10th such event that this individual has facilitated. In this story, a rabbi who runs a Jewish student center says that he worries that the university, despite its embrace of the First Amendment, may nonetheless be tarnishing the A&M brand, or that the A&M brand may be tarnished as a result of permitting this to go forward. You are the chief steward. You're the chief brand officer. Do you worry that the A&M brand will in any way be tarnished by the appearance of this individual on campus?
I think we're trying to be very clear that this has nothing to do with A&M. It
Right.
never has, and nothing that this person has done over the years has ever had anything to do with A&M. And the brand we don't want to tarnish is the brand that we are an institution that is open to conversation
Right.
consistently with the First Amendment. That's a brand that I would hate to see suppressed even more.
Got it. Excellent. Let me ask you about another, you had this decision made not long ago to permit this event to go forward. Another meeting you had a couple days ago was with faculty at Texas A&M who are concerned about the prospect of the president-elect and his administration going forward with a plan to do some number of deportations of undocumented individuals in this country. And across the country, on university campuses, there is a particular level of anxiety about what happens to, and the risk potentially to, undocumented students. You've had a bunch of university faculty around the country, including some in Texas, at Rice and at Trinity, and at University of Houston downtown, among others, who've signed a letter saying, if the new administration attempts to deport undocumented individuals, including undocumented students on college campuses, we are going to protect those students. And so some faculty around the country have said they want to create sanctuary campuses, much as there are sanctuary cities, to protect these students. Your faculty came to you and to your provost a couple days ago and talked about a petition circulated to turn Texas A&M University into a sanctuary campus should this take place. Can you offer your perspective on that?
Absolutely. The question of what a sanctuary campus means is extraordinarily hazy, and let me suggest the elements that might contain. It might contain a sense of not allowing ICE onto your campus, so forth. Under Regulation 2011, Department of Homeland Security regulation that governs ICE, they don't come on to sensitive areas, which include churches, campuses, public education, without permission from the highest levels of DHS or a court order or exigent circumstances.
Right.
So that part of it is pretty covered already,
right.
Number one. Number two, we don't have repositories of information about who is documented and undocumented. People say your police officers should not cooperate with ICE. Our police officers, I mean, they're patrolling our fraternities.
Well, but you do know, Mr. President, you do know, in fact, which students are undocumented, at least in part, and I imagine this is the case, Senator Williams probably knows better than this, that there is a law in the books, at least for the moment in Texas, that allows undocumented students to pay in-state tuition rates. Theoretically, somebody is aware of the status of an individual when they apply, or they apply to attend and to pay for their 4 years at Texas A&M or more.
Actually, we don't need to know that. We don't need to know that, because what we need to know is, do they meet the qualifications having graduated from a Texas high school? I guess
my point is that somebody is making a distinction about what rate of tuition that individual pays. It may just be that if you're a resident of the state of Texas, we don't ask about your status.
Bingo.
Yeah.
That's actually it.
That's
now,
it. Okay.
For some purposes, they need to know they're undocumented. They can't get federal financial aid, for example, as an undocumented.
I guess the question that the faculty seem to be asking is, will the university essentially put itself between authorities who might come and wish to take students away and those students? Will you be a protective force?
I think there's no evidence that that's, if there's any possibility of that happening, it is such a long process, because you have to change a whole set of regulatory dimensions that govern ICE. You have to change the law in a number of different ways. So it certainly is the case that our obligation, our passion, our goal is to provide a supportive, safe environment for our students to really thrive, to develop, have the best educational experience they possibly can. There is nothing on the horizon that really jeopardizes that. And we are deeply committed to ensuring that those students have.
So you listen to the faculty, but beyond that, there's not going to be any statement of policy on behalf of the university as it relates to this?
I've stated policy already, which is every student who is at Texas A&M is legitimately there, and our job is to provide the best environment we possibly can to ensure. Now, that does require us to help the students better understand why they are there and safe there, at the moment. So the point that the faculty makes, which I think is a really good one, is that we do have students who are insecure. This has been a very disruptive election where things have been said that I would not have imagined would be part of legitimate discourse.
In our lifetime,
In our lifetime, absolutely. So we understand that,
Yep.
and we understand how that has made people nervous. But I think what we want to do, and what when I met with the professors, we had very good conversations about how do we help the students understand that, and how do we provide pathways for them to get additional services that they may need to ensure that the university can't necessarily provide, legal services and other things, to ensure that they have the kind of safety and protection they need to be able to thrive in their educational experience. And so a big part of what that does highlight is the need for better communication and better ways of helping our students really understand how protected and safe they are.
Excellent. All right, so we talked about white supremacists, we talked about deportations. Now let's talk about something really controversial, football. Last item kind of in the circulation right now is football. Is Kevin Sumlin going to be the coach of the Texas A&M University football team next September?
Well, you have the wrong person here. You need my athletic director.
No, Mr. President. Whenever somebody tries to pass me the buck like that, I pass it right back. This is not the athletic director's decision. Come on, you're in this.
Kevin Sumlin is our coach and has my complete support, my athletic director's complete support.
So he will be the coach next September.
Kevin Sumlin has my complete support.
Oh man. Well, you've been trained well. Well, you know, so you hired Chris Peterson at University of Washington, did you not?
I did.
He was a hot prospect potentially. If UT didn't get Tom Herman, they were talking about Chris Peterson, or at least it was discussed that he might be on the market. You don't want to get Chris Peterson back to College Station the way you got him in Washington?
Well, it's fair to say Chris Peterson gets offered about every open coaching job every year.
Right.
And I'm sure it was my charm that persuaded him to leave.
I have absolutely no doubt.
Come to Washington. But I have every indication he's in the middle of a pretty exciting football season, and he's not talking much about going anywhere.
Well, he was an extraordinary coach in a couple different ways. One of them, I believe, when you hired him from Boise State, he was one of two coaches in the country. The other was at Rice, whose team's graduation rate actually exceeded on a percentage basis the graduation rate of the university. I mean, he's succeeded on a whole bunch of levels when you got him there.
And he is amazing in terms of what he does with respect to recruiting kids who really fit into his system, which is a character-based issue.
Values.
Very much so.
So you were president of Washington, you were president of Utah. Those are both big-time football programs. A&M's a big-time football program. You've been around this block before. You understand how this works. He's won at least 8 games, Sumlin. Coach Sumlin has won at least 8 games in each of the seasons he's been at the university. But A&M fans are no more satisfied with 4 lost seasons than a lot of other people, and you know they want to see this be better. I mean, I understand that UT has been in a worse place, relatively speaking, than A&M. I just wonder if you believe that there's any reason to even have this conversation. I know he has your support, but you've been careful in what you've said.
Well, I think at the end of the day, there's an enormously strong, positive movement on that football program, which you really have to be conscious of. I mean, prior to Coach Sumlin's arrival, it had been literally years since we had been to a bowl game.
Right.
We've been to 3 bowl games.
Right. And you're about to be at another one.
He has had, by far, the best record of any coach who has moved a team from a less challenging conference to a more challenging conference. I mean, if you look at all the changes, Utah, Colorado.
Right. Did Sharp send you here to say bad things about the Big 12 again? Is that what happened?
No. I'm just saying, you know, that we're in a tough neighborhood.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
In terms of football.
Yes, you are.
And he's done a great job. He has had about the winningest record of any SEC coach in his first 4 years.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of really positive things, and the school, it's tough to move because the play in one conference is often very different, kind of speed, size.
And he has your confidence. You've been explicit about that, which is good. All right, let's move away from all this wonderful current stuff and talk more broadly about higher ed. again, Matthew Watkins, I read all my news in the Tribune, so I have to constantly cite Matthew's reporting. Reported a couple of weeks ago that A&M's enrollment at the moment, I mentioned in the introduction, is now more than 66,000.
That's right.
The university's enrollment has increased by 10,000 students since 2010. Basically, what you've done is taken the A&M campus in 2010 and then taken TCU and added TCU to the campus size in 2010. 66,000. It is now among the largest universities. I think you're even just past Ohio State. For a long time, Ohio State was said to be up near the top. Is this a good thing? What does this mean? Why and what are the implications of the university's growth at this level?
You know, size in and of itself is not the issue. The issue really is, can you continue to provide the quality of education?
Yes.
And there, I think, we are on a pause right now to see, what is our student-faculty ratio? What's our classroom inventory? What's our laboratory inventory? What are our students?
What are the impacts of this?
Yeah.
Right.
And getting that right. And as you might imagine, some places we're very good, some places we need to do some work, but we know where that is.
Right.
But the outcomes turn out to be extraordinary. I mean, we have now the highest, shortest time to graduation.
You're number one in 4-year, number one in 5-year, number one in 6-year of the publics in the whole state of Texas,
and
right?
Number one in underrepresented minority graduation rates. We are best return on investment in the state of Texas as they measure that. We're the number one school in Texas in terms of social mobility, in terms of, we have 23% of our entering class this year underrepresented minorities and over 25% first generation.
Yeah, it's 26% first generation students in a state where the population is changing as Texas is amazing, and I want to come back to that. So the statistics are all trending in your direction, but as you say, there are some things that are, and again, Matthew reported that the number of classes at Texas A&M with more than 100 students has increased by 17% since 2010. That there are some students who can't find tables in the dining halls are having to sit on the floor. There are some students who are complaining that they can't get to campus because traffic in College Station, consider those words, traffic in College Station is so bad. So I'm just wondering, at what point does all this wonderful growth, which suggests you have a product people want to buy, let's acknowledge that. But at what point does that wonderful growth begin to go down the other side of the mountain?
Well, that's exactly what we're working on.
Yeah.
But let me turn it around a little bit. I mean, what we're really concerned about is how do we have a very special university. Because we are a major research university, there's a kind of teaching we can do that not all universities can do. These high-impact, transformational learning experiences, which is one of the main pillars of my emphasis and of my presidency. And our goal is to not only have the students sit there and be passive receptors of information, but also to have these kind of interactive experiences where they really develop their own capacity for conceptualization, their own capacity to draw the intellectual strands of their discipline together and really use it in this problem-solving way. And we actually are very much in the process of identifying what kind of experiences provide that, these high-impact transformational learning experiences. We now can ensure that every student who walks across campus has at least one. What we're working to do is ensure that every student who walks across campus has multiple experiences of that sort. Yeah. We can do that, and that is a major focus of the university. If we can do that with the context of the size we have. Yeah. And the other things you talk about are real things. We are expanding our dining facilities. We're putting some tens of millions of dollars into that this year, expanding that. But the classroom issue is interesting because yes, it is true that the number of students in a class of over 100 has increased. The number of students in a class of 20 or less has also dramatically increased. And when you actually look at the data, there's no evidence that there's any pedagogical advantage in a class beyond 75, that you can be 75 to 250.
Materially no difference.
No difference. Where it does matter is between 0 and 25. And we're increasing the number of those classes pretty significantly.
So you said you've hit the pause for the time being on the rapid growth over the last 7 years, and you're going to see what happens. As you know, Mr. President, this state has grown precipitously over the recent years. 27 million today. We're going to 54 million by 2050. The number of kids entering the public education system at the moment annually, given the growth of the population, is somewhere in the 80 to 85,000 a year. Those kids are in many respects going to become your kids at some point soon. And there's already a problem with a lot of families in the state who have umbrage at the idea that they can't get their kid into UT or they can't get their kid into A&M. You know, there are a lot of public university options and private college options in the state of Texas, but the kids want to go to UT and A&M in large measure, and they can't get in. So how do you balance that? What do you do?
Well, I get an unlisted phone number in March.
Smart.
That's the first thing I
Smart.
do.
I hope you negotiated that into your deal. That's good. But seriously, I mean, the admissions question, which is a matter of public policy as much as it's a matter of higher education in the state of Texas, and will likely be a topic of conversation in this next legislative session. What do you do about that? When you have a family come to you and say, I went to A&M, my brother went to A&M, it's been a dream of my kid to go to A&M to College Station, not to A&M Junction or A&M anywhere else, but to go to College Station, and you can't get in. What do you say?
Well, I think at the end of the day, our obligation is twofold. Our obligation is certainly to educate, consistent with our land-grant mission, as many students as we feasibly can. I get that. Yeah. But at the same time is to provide them a quality of education that's absolutely essential for the future of Texas. When you think about Texas, we're about the same population as California. And yet California has, even on the public side, 6 AAU universities. Yep. We have 2. Yep. So one of the effects of that, by the way, has been that we probably have a substantially lower percentage of out-of-state students than any of our peer institutions. And to some degree, so does UT. Right. So to the extent that we're doing that job, it's critical that we do it, but we do it well, because we do not advantage anybody if we hollow out the quality of that education. Simply checking off a box that you've got a degree does not serve the state in that regard. Right. So the other part of it is going to be, I think, the growth of some of these other institutions that really, many of which are really very good. Right.
University of Texas, if you ask the University of Texas administrators about how they're dealing with the demand and their capacity being near max, they talk a lot about technology. They say, you know, we're doing a fair amount of distance stuff. We're trying to figure out ways that we can educate kids at the UT quality level without necessarily having them physically on campus or in the classroom. How much of that are you doing?
I think there has been an enormous amount of churning about that over the years with no evidence that that is diminishing demand for on-campus, face-to-face kind of interaction.
Well, there's a social aspect to coming to a university, being on campus, right, that you can't replicate.
But there's also, there's also a human-to-human interaction.
Yeah, right,
even if you look at the studies of brains, it's very interesting to see that what somebody sees on a television screen, you can say exactly the same thing on a television screen and say it in person. It actually has a significantly different educational outcome.
It's just different.
And so, but which isn't to say we're not very much in that field. We're in that field and going to increase that rather dramatically as well, I think, in part because everybody is in the midst of a world in which their jobs transform rather rapidly. I mean, my average graduate's going to have 3 careers, not 3 jobs, but 3 careers. Right. How do we, and there's where I think technology can be enormously powerful. How do we help people make those transitions, develop those additional skill sets, number one. Number two, we have millions of people in the state of Texas who have started college but not finished. Mm-hmm. If we're going to get to a point where we have the college educated population the state really needs, we need to reach out to those people. So we're working on what we might call a degree completion initiative too, which again will be technologically based. Help reach out to people who started but haven't finished. But let them finish.
But that's actually a good transition because, you know, there is this 60 by 30 plan that the Higher Education Coordinating Board governor has gotten behind, that the state political and policy universe has gotten behind, that says that we want, by 2030, that's the 30 part, 60%, that's the 60 part, of 25 to 34-year-olds in Texas to have some kind of higher education certificate or higher education degree. Statewide right now, that percentage is only 38%. So to get from 38% to 60% by 2030 seems like a pretty heavy lift. However, as I mentioned, or as we mentioned a couple minutes ago, you all are doing great in terms of what you're contributing to that. You're first in 4-year, first in 5-year, first in 6-year. What is your secret? How can you export the success of A&M to other institutions of higher education so that we can get more universities to have a better track record on graduation rates?
Well, it's an enormously challenging but exciting process to do it. Part of it has to do with looking at devoting as much of your resources to the educational process slimming down administration as much as you can. And we are the lowest in Texas by a considerable rate.
Well, Chancellor and I were in College Station a couple weeks ago, and he made this point over and over that and we're going to come to funding in a second, and the legislature's view of whether you all are spending the money that you get well or not. There's a lot of opportunity to beat up on you guys for spending money on things that are unnecessary, but your overhead rate is like crazy low, right? You're spending on administrative like 3%. I mean,
3.7%.
It's like 3.7%. You can't find successful businesses that are spending that little on.
Well, it's about half whatever the next university is in the state of Texas, too. But what it allows us to do is to look at what are the touch points that really help success. I mean, number one, you have to be relatively cognizant of making sure you've created pathways for the students that don't have bottlenecks in it, that you have ways of starting education, knowing that the kids won't necessarily end where they start, but you allow them to start in a ways where there are a number of pathways there.
Yep.
Engineering is a good example. We used to have kids who would start, I'm going to be a chemical engineer or I'm going to be an electrical engineer. They would get a year into it and say, I think I don't really want to be electrical. I think I want to be mechanical. You'd have to go back, take some additional classes. Now, the first year of engineering is all uniform.
Yep.
Advising programs, where we're to the point where we are close to being able to say, if you'll sit down, plan your 4 years, and we have a whole set of programs where you can do that, and meet with the counselor and get that approved. If for any reason related to us that you don't graduate, because there's a bottleneck class you couldn't get into or a class that was supposed to be available wasn't available, we'll pay your tuition going forward. We'll let you graduate. A tuition guarantee. Yeah. A graduation guarantee. Right. Counseling services become really important. And this is one of the things people often miss is that they think, if we just have classes, kids will be fine. But they need work in trying to figure out what these pathways are to ensure they can do it. So there's a whole series of things that you have to pay attention to. Where are the bottleneck points?
Interestingly enough, on the counseling question, one of the things that I hope we would spend at least a minute or two on is the changing nature of the student population on a campus like A&M. In a state like Texas, where the population is not only growing quickly, but changing dynamically. By 2040, we'll be 55% Hispanic population, 32% Anglo. So, I mean, a real shift. The non-Anglo student population on many of these campuses at the moment, and we said 26% of the kids, not all of them are non-Anglo, but 26% of the students at A&M right now are first-generation students. There's just it's a different approach to getting often kids who are first in their family or first in their community to go to college through. Counseling has at other places been a big, and I suspect also at A&M, been a big part of this. Texas State University, for instance, has a particular level of success at retention rates for non-Anglo students. Their retention rates for non-Anglo students actually exceed their retention rates for Anglo students, which is unusual. And they attribute the success of that to their counseling program. So I guess the question is, how does demographic change fit into your calculation about this? Because from a graduation rate standpoint, it's just a different world today than it was 20 years ago.
I think that's absolutely right. Part of this is focusing on what are the differences. I mean, when I think about many of our kids who are third and fourth generation coming to college, they've got all the procedural experience that helps them understand how they prepare a class schedule.
They have a support system too,
They have a support system. They have parents who sit down, help them think through what classes they ought to take. They have that expectation of how the shift from high school to college changes. They sort of understand that. That doesn't mean, they're not 18-year-olds and have all the things that happen in that context, but they sort of have that understanding, that glide path. When you're first generation, that kind of procedural experience isn't really part of your experience.
Well, frankly, from an economic standpoint, you may be working as well as going to school. The amount of time that you devote to your studies may be less than some other people have the ability to devote, right?
It is.
It's a bunch of complicating factors.
It is sometimes, although I want to stress that the range of scholarships we're able to offer frequently ameliorate a lot of that burden.
So you can take some of those other issues off the table, right?
At least reduce them. I mean, sometimes they work because they also continue to support families and so forth.
Can you keep this experience of getting a degree at A&M affordable enough for those families and for families generally? A lot of talk these days about whether higher ed is affordable enough. I realize you're not Baylor or SMU or Rice, but nonetheless, people still look at the amount of money it costs to go to A&M and they go,
Yeah, I mean, we spend an enormous amount of time thinking about affordability because it relates very deeply to access. But
Yeah.
let me just try to put it in a little bit of perspective. I mean, one is we right now have, I don't know, the 15th or 16th level tuition in the state. So we have managed to keep tuition low. Two, we have actually, because of the way we're able to deploy in a fairly targeted and so far relatively successful way, scholarship grant money and support money, and so forth. We actually, the last 3 years, the percentage of our students with debt has declined, and the amount of debt has declined.
And that's actually part of the 60 by 30 plan as well, trying to get a better handle on student debt. So you're actually coming at that directly.
We are, but let me be clear about something else, which is the average debt of our students that leave will be about $24,000. I mean, and would we like it to be zero? Absolutely.
Yeah.
$24,000, cost of a car. I mean, this is given the lifetime investment, hard to say that this is not, the return on that investment is probably the best investment you'll ever make in your life. But let me add a couple of other points that just make this clear, I think. When we think about this and look at return on investment, we are ranked among the top handful in the nation, not just in the state of Texas, but in the nation, because the gap between college education and high school education, on average, I mean, it's a bell curve, and I get that, but on average is growing really significantly. And so the need to provide that with an understanding that the public is less able to support that. The cost of education, here's what people sometimes don't think through very carefully, which is the cost to us of education in inflation adjusted to dollars is probably about the same. Actually, I think it's less than it was in 1985. So it's not that the cost has gone up. What shifted is the payer mix. In 1985, the state was paying just about 80%, and the students were paid 20%. That percentage is
now flipped.
As it has flipped, so has the perception of the public that college education used to be 30% of Americans would say it's primarily a private benefit, a private good, and 70% would say it's a public good. Those percentages flip.
And so more people are complaining today that whatever they're paying is too much simply because they're bearing more of a burden. And so, you know, as you well know, long before you arrived here, tuition was deregulated by the state of Texas. And there's a kind of a myth about the growth of tuition over that period of time. In fact, the rate of growth of tuition since deregulation has actually been lower than the rate of growth previous to deregulation. But nonetheless, you have this problem when the legislature comes into session, as it's about to. There's constantly, people are at loggerheads about whether you all are spending too much or not getting enough for the money that you're being given and whether the state is actually contributing enough. Do you want to wade in here? You're about to enter your first legislative session in January as president, full session as president. There's already a fight over the increases that universities have put in, modest, that, oh, no, the chairs of higher ed in the Senate and the House and the lieutenant governor have been shaking their fists at all of you about the idea that you're making higher ed too unaffordable. What's your perspective on that?
Well, I think we need to start from a set of facts to really think this through very carefully. I mean, I would point out, number one, that we still have tuition coupled with scholarships that allows very broad access, and I think that's true across the state.
Even if you were to increase by some small 2%, whatever, modest.
Well, I could increase by 10%, I'd still be.
And you'd still be okay.
I'd still be a lot less. But secondly, this is really important. State of Texas is at an inflection point. It's at some point going to need to think through where is its economy based. We've had an extraordinary economic growth based in large part on natural resources, on agriculture and so forth, shifting significantly to a knowledge-based economy.
Information economy, right.
The knowledge-based economy fundamentally depends on a natural resource, and that is brain power. Texas right now, when I compare my amount of dollars per FTE and tuition to any of the peer institutions I'm comparing myself against, we are very low. And I think we need to think that through, because when you think about it, we are the one social service program that works. We are the one economic engine program that works. And the notion that reducing the pathologies that will result from hollowing out the great institutions that are here in this state, we won't see it in my lifetime, but they will be devastating ultimately. for
But
the
Mr.
state.
President, you understand that the
Just
state,
let me finish just a
sure,
second.
sure.
Because I think that's really important. Number two, I think you have to really think through what is a tuition increase. Everybody says, well, a 2% tuition increase, it's really a problem. But if that failure to get a 2% tuition increase or failure to get increased funding from the state results in me having to reduce the number of sections for particular classes, and then I end up with a bottleneck, I've just given the students the highest tuition increase I can give them because I've made them pay for an entire extra semester or an entire extra year. That's the biggest tuition increase.
So it's pay now or pay later. Right. Okay, so you're going to join the long list of idealistic higher ed administrators who troop up to the Capitol every odd numbered year and are disappointed by what you hear.
No, what I'm going to do, my job, I'm not a lobbyist. My job is to
Oh,
basically...
sure you are.
No,
Sure you are.
Absolutely not.
You're not going to lobby the legislature?
I'm not going to lobby. I never lobby.
But you won't go sit in front of these guys and say, I want to advocate for this wonderful university that I
I'm going
lead?
to go in front of those guys and I'm going to say, here are the facts.
Yeah.
It's your decision to do what you want to do with this state, but here are the facts. I do not lobby. Right. My job is to basically lay out the facts. I'm a servant in a public institution. I don't lobby. I'm going to.
You live in a fact-based universe.
I'm telling you, these are the facts, and now you have to figure out what kind of state you want and what you want to do.
But you understand, you've been here 19 months, but you've surely been here long enough to know that this state has limited resources, as the state of Washington surely did, as the state of Utah surely did, that right now we're going to have less money in the next budget than we did in the last budget because of the price of oil and gas, and that public ed has its hand out, and healthcare has its hand out. And in some ways, and it's been the case for some time, higher ed is often, as those priorities rank, third of three in the eyes of people up the street.
Well, that's true nationwide. I mean, if you look at the percentage of state budgets devoted to higher education over the last 30 years and see just a dramatic diminution, I think that's uniform around the country. And I want to say, I really respect the difficulty of the job they have. I mean, I don't go to the legislature and say, how can you not fund us? I understand it.
Right.
I mean, you have tremendous needs on the healthcare side. We have a disastrous healthcare system and dramatically overpriced for the outcomes. We haven't figured out what to do about that, so we so far just put more money into it. Public transportation, safety, public ed. I mean, these are all really important priorities, and I don't think we should think of this as, kind of beggar thy neighbor, and if I get money, if you get money, I don't. We're all in this kind of competition.
Even though that's factually the case, these are not referendum dollars, these are choice dollars.
These are absolutely choice dollars.
Right.
And that's the job they have. And it is a tough job, and I really admire them for the work they do to try to balance that out. I will say, again, going back to the facts, if you're concerned about any of the things that make a society up, if I graduate somebody, they are likely to use in the social safety net $800 to $2,500 a year less per year. So I graduate 15,000 students, and if I can graduate those 15,000 students on time, their contributions, both in terms of their increased tax payments and their reduction in the use of all social services, much less likely to use welfare services, Medicaid services, addiction rates, incarceration rates, all dramatically lower. So again, I think the goal is not to pit higher education against these others. We are part of this. And how you get that balance, it's tough. I mean, I'm going to give them the facts about what universities do and need, and then they have some tough choices.
You'll make an affirmative case, that's the point, an affirmative case. So we're going to go to questions in a second, but I wasn't necessarily going to ask this, but then I was with the Chancellor a couple weeks ago, and he told me a story that I thought was interesting, and it made me think about what is one of the many things that is particular to A&M that other universities don't experience.
So this is from the Chancellor, right? I think I might have to go.
You have to go. but it's the core. I mean, it's sort of a cliche on one level, but how do you have a conversation about Texas A&M and the culture of the university without talking about the core? The Chancellor said that when he graduated, he said to his father, the days of the core are coming to an end. This is in the 70s, 73, I think. The days of the core are coming to an end. The core is not going to persist as a fact of life on this campus. There's no way that in the modern world the core can persist. The core has persisted. You got more than 2,400 students enrolled at A&M who are now part of the core. The core continues to be the defining cultural totem of the university, and presumably will be forever. It's changed. Matthew again reported earlier this year, I think the line was more diversity, less screaming. The core is not the exact same core that it was, but it still continues to be this thing. And I just wonder how you view it. You're coming in 19 months. You've been handed this thing that's such an essential part of the quilt. Talk about your view of the core at the moment at the university.
You know, I have to say I've not been at a university to experience something quite like it.
I think it'd be impossible to, right?
Maybe nothing like it in the United States.
Yeah.
I think it is a really powerful part of the university, and it is thriving.
Yep.
I mean, it's, like you say, it's got, I think, we're almost 2,700 students this year. They have the best GPAs they've ever had in history. They average over a 3.0. But I think it's much deeper than that. What I love about the core is these kids walk around the school in those uniforms, and it reflects in a very visual, immediate way what's the values that are so central to this university. If you want to talk about what's unique about A&M, it isn't the core. It's that way in which the values are meaningful, wrapped into that educational process. I mean, this extraordinary research we do even reflects those values. I mean, and that is an area where we really are working to expand it to enable even more of this kind of problem-oriented research that works across all these disciplines. There's a great intentionality about the research that professors coalesce across departments, and we're working very hard to make that the norm and not the exception. Coalesce across departments to focus on problems, to solve those problems, to make the world a better place. And at heart, that's what those values really represent. So when you see these kids walking across the campus with this uniform on, it reminds you in this very visual, immediate, everyday way what this university represents, what it stands for, why it attracts students with a certain kind of character, and why they go out in the world and do what they do. And you talk to, I mean, Wall Street Journal does a survey every year of HR directors in the Fortune 500, and they ask what universities do you prefer to hire from. We come up as the second public university in the nation. And it is not only that extremely good technical training, but it is that desire to use that education to make the world a better place on behalf of others. That notion is so deeply embedded. I think the core, John likes to say, and I love this, that everybody at A&M drinks the Kool-Aid, but the core mixes it. That you really see him walking around, and it is this embodiment of that set of values, that character, that honor, that integrity. I really like that.
Well, we started with you as the Chief Brand Officer. We end with you as the Chief Brand Officer. I think that's excellent. All right, let's go to questions. We have a microphone. We'll walk around. We've got a few minutes. If you have one in the back, sir, right back there. Thank you for making time for us today. Really,
My pleasure.
Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I
Sir.
appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. President. What will your lobbyists be telling the legislature about the top 10% rule?
Since you're not going to lobby,
Tommy, what? Michael?
question was, what will your what will your lobbyists be telling the university about the top 10% rule? Senator West from Dallas, who is the vice chair of the Higher Ed Committee in the Senate, said just 2 days ago at our event, he absolutely expects there to be a conversation about the top 10% rule in the 85th session. So what is your perspective on this going to be?
From our perspective, I certainly understand the benefit that has given to students across the state. There's a certain kind of hope that's there.
Right.
If you excel in your school, wherever, if you bloom where you're planted, wherever you are, you're going to have a real chance. And I think that notion of universities with their hand out, reaching out to people, giving them that sense that you can appreciate the American dream, you can live it, you can come. I think it's been really powerful in that regard, and it has not disabled us from getting an incredibly vibrant, dynamic, diverse, representative class.
It hasn't hamstrung you. I mean, obviously what happens at A&M and happens at UT on this specific question has been different. But the knock on this rule in the broad sense is that because of so many automatic admits, it really prevents you from building the class that you would build if left to your own devices.
I think it hasn't prevented us from doing that.
Has not prevented you.
Yeah, I think we have extraordinarily imaginative, effective admissions directors who, of the non-automatic admits,
Have good latitude, right?
have good latitude and incredibly thorough and careful. I mean, they read the full files 2 or 3 times.
Right.
And I think it's helped to shape the class.
You know, the other knock on this rule has been, you have a kid who's in the top 11% at Highland Park in Dallas, gets into Harvard but can't get into UT or A&M.
Well, we're better than Harvard.
Okay, fine. I'm just checking. I wanted to give you an opportunity. Since you're a Harvard alumnus, you could just smack talk Harvard, and it's okay. You get the right to do it. Don't let Reeve ask a question if Reeve is sitting behind a pole there. So I want to just be sure we're clear about that. What? Go ahead.
Hello, Mr. President. My name is Jamie Bennett, class of 15. We met a second ago.
One of the very first students I met at A&M.
Great, excellent.
And himself a journalist.
Great, yes, sir.
I'm going to ask you a challenging question then, but it's about Kane Hall specifically. To those unfamiliar, Kane Hall is a former athletic dorm, from what I understand, that was demolished recently. Kane Hall was home to student counseling services,
Right.
student disability services, legal services, new student family programs,
Right.
residence hall life, et cetera, in the center of campus. It was moved to far west campus area and was replaced with a parking garage and a hotel, one of which students will use. The other hotel I don't see students ever using. So what is the rationale, the reason for moving those essential departments of A&M and students that need them in the center of campus away and replacing it with a hotel that students are likely to not use?
Well, there are 2 or 3 parts to that I think are important to understand. One is where the center of campus is a lot more hazy than even it was 2 or 3 years ago. So there's a very, very big, significantly underserved student population over on West Campus now. And on East Campus, we do still have more, but West Campus has grown at a level where to say that the services should all be on East Campus and not West isn't as logical as it used to be. And one of the conversations we're having is, should we disaggregate these services because of the size of the campus and where students tend to be. But the second thing is, it's temporary. Kane Hall came down because of the building of the hotel and the garage. The Kane Hall will be rebuilt. Now, it will not be student services, actually. It's going to be one of the things we need. There's a certain size of classroom we need that we have a pretty desperate need for. Kane Hall is very well located, and it's going to be rebuilt just a little bit to the right. It's going to be rebuilt, and it's going to be a classroom building. In the same time, Bazell is going to come down, and Bazell is going to be torn down and actually rebuilt as a student services building. So for that part of campus, all of those services will come back there in a brand new building that will be much better suited to providing those services. So it's a good question.
Do you have enough, I want to take the baton from this questioner and ask, whether you have enough access to resources for buildings. This has been a persistent topic of conversation in the last couple of legislative sessions. Finally, tuition revenue bonds passed, but it was a while before they did, and there was a discussion about how on some of the campuses that were maxed out on space, that you just needed more facilities, didn't have access to the resources to do that.
Well, let me say we are very grateful for what the legislature did. We think that really is helping the university enormously. We've got these projects in train, and they're enormously powerful. But you've actually asked a university president whether he has enough money.
The answer is obviously no, right?
Yeah.
Clearly. Okay, good. Just want to be sure that you answered as I expected. Any other questions?
I have a question about, why don't you tell us a minute about your law school? You and I were talking about that earlier. I think that's a really exciting, dynamic development for A&M.
Texas A&M University Law School.
Yeah. It's been wonderful since the university's acquired the law school.
This is with the old Texas Wesleyan.
Texas Wesleyan.
Up in Fort Worth, has now ported over, and it is branded as such, and you all are running it.
And it has done remarkable things. It starts, as it often does at any part of the university, with great faculty hiring. I mean, this dean has hired 15, 18 now, really extraordinary professors from other universities all over the country, but done it in a way that is really consistent with what our larger strategic plan is for the university. And I mentioned that a little bit earlier, which is we're looking at where are our strengths and how can we help those strengths coalesce and come together, work across disciplines to really address these great problems. Yeah. So if you look at some of the things we're doing an awful lot of, we're very strong in a number of the high-tech areas. And so they have added there a significant group of professors dealing with intellectual property law and high-tech law related to that. We have some surprisingly strong international programs in the
Right.
school. We're not thought of as an international school, but in fact, very strong in that regard. Very strong in engineering, and we're using that to actually enhance our medical school as well, creating a school within our medical school called an engineering medical school. They're looking a lot at healthcare law and things like that. And that in turn has really attracted a very attractive, very strong group of students who understand that it's both a quality education at an affordable price.
So you don't have the problem that some law schools in this state and elsewhere have had, that there is a declining demand for slots in law school. I've heard from people at law schools say, it's really kind of a seller's market at the moment. Law schools are having a hard time getting kids to go to law school.
Well, we reduced the size of the class because we wanted to provide that quality of education, get that student-teacher ratio right. We also wanted to provide clinical, experiential opportunities for our students, and so that's
the demand
also,
is there.
The demand is there, and interestingly, reflected in the quality of students, we were just ranked in the top 40 in the United States for bar passage rate, which is one of the things you're also seeing. I mean, the top 40 schools are going to be doing fine if their kids can pass the bar and get those jobs that require bar passage, become real lawyers, and we're in that group. And so we're seeing that. I'm former dean of a law school. I really understand acutely.
Right, you know
the
this stuff,
challenges,
right? Yeah.
But I'm really proud of what our school's doing, and I think it's doing in part because it is doing what A&M generally does, which is what are our strengths, where do we really make the best contribution, how do we really do research and training that really fits people for making a contribution in the world, and the law schools pick that up.
Good.
In a very short period of time.
Going to call it there? Mr. President, it's nice of you to come over. Happy holidays. I hope we'll get to see you back here in the legislature. You won't be lobbying, as you pointed out, but we'll have you for a social visit. How about that?
I like that.
All right,
very
good.
much.
Mr. President, thank you so much. Good. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good.